The shadow of death had already fallen across Penny Owen's cabin when she first heard hoofbeats approaching through the moonless Wyoming night. It was 1876, and in Evanston, a rough-edged railroad town that had sprung up 7 years earlier, a widow with a sick child could expect little mercy from a world that had already taken too much. Penny clutched her feverish 5-year-old son closer to her chest, his small body burning against hers like a coal pulled straight from the fire. For 3 days, Jacob had been consumed by fever, his childish laughter replaced by delirious murmurs and painful coughing that racked his tiny frame. She had tried everything: cool cloths, herbal teas, prayers whispered into the darkness, but nothing had broken the fever's hold. The hoofbeats grew louder, and Penny felt fear clutch at her heart. Night visitors rarely brought good news to a woman living alone on the outskirts of town. Her husband Thomas had been dead just over a year, taken by the same unforgiving winter that had claimed so many others. Since then, she had managed to keep their small homestead running and Jacob fed, but only just. When the knock came at her door, she nearly didn't answer it. But desperation moved her feet across the rough wooden floorboards. "Who's there?" she called, reaching for the shotgun Thomas had taught her to use. "Yates Jensen, madam. Ranch hand from the Double Cross. I'm just passing by and saw your light. Everything all right?" Something in his voice, a gentle concern unusual in these parts, made Penny lower the gun and open the door a crack. The man before her stood tall and lean, his hat held respectfully in his hands. In the dim lamplight, she could see his face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes held a kindness that seemed out of place in the harsh territory. "My son," she said, her voice cracking. "He's very ill. I need to get him to Dr. Harlow in town, but I can't leave him to fetch the wagon, and I fear moving him might make it worse." Yates Jensen looked past her to where the boy lay on the small bed in the corner, his face flushed with fever. "I can take you both," he said simply. Within minutes, Penny found herself sitting before Yates on his sturdy bay horse, Jacob wrapped in blankets in her arms. The night air was crisp with early autumn, stars pricking the vast Wyoming sky as they rode toward the cluster of lights that was Evanston. Dr. Franklin Harlow had been the town's physician since before the Union Pacific Railroad had established its divisional headquarters there. His practice occupied a whitewashed building on Front Street, not far from the saloons and general stores that served the railroad workers and ranching families of the area. When they arrived, Yates helped Penny down from the horse, taking Jacob gently from her arms as she steadied herself. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching for her son. "I'll carry him in," Yates insisted, and Penny was too exhausted to argue. Dr. Harlow answered after the third knock, his spectacles perched low on his nose and irritation clear on his face at being disturbed so late. His expression hardened further when he saw who stood on his doorstep. "Mrs. Owen," he said coldly. "What brings you here at this hour?" "It's Jacob," Penny said, stepping forward. "He's burning with fever, been this way for days. Nothing I do helps. Please, he needs medicine. Doctor." Harlow's gaze moved from Penny to the child in Yates's arms, then to Yates himself. A flicker of recognition passed across his face. "Jensen, isn't it? One of McAllister's men." "Yes, sir," Yates replied, "but I'm here helping Mrs. Owen. The boy needs attention right away. Doctor." Harlow's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Owen knows very well that I require payment up front. After last time, I can pay," Penny interrupted desperately. "Not all in cash, but I have some eggs, fresh butter." "I do not run a trading post, Mrs. Owen," Dr. Harlow cut in. "Your husband left debts unpaid when he died, and I won't be adding to them." Yates shifted Jacob in his arms, the boy's breathing labored. "Doctor, surely you can't turn away a sick child." I have a practice to maintain, Harlow replied stiffly. The railroad brings in new people every day, people who can pay for my services. I cannot afford charity cases. This isn't charity, Yates said, his voice hardening. This is a child's life. Dr. Harlow's face remained impassive. There are other doctors, try Ogden or Salt Lake City. With that, he began to close the door. Penny lunged forward, pushing her foot into the doorway. Please, Jacob could die. Remove yourself from my doorway, Mrs. Owen, or I will call the sheriff. Yates stepped between them before Penny could respond. We'll go, he said quietly. Come on, Mrs. Owen. As they walked back to the horse, Penny's legs threatened to give way beneath her. Jacob moaned softly in Yates's arms, his small face contorted in pain. What am I going to do? She whispered, tears streaming down her face. Ogden is over 30 miles away. Yates looked at the child, then at Penny's desperate face. In that moment, a decision crystallized within him. There's a doctor in Fort Bridger. Good man, treated me once when I took a bad fall. Name's Dr. Sullivan. Fort Bridger. That's 3 days' ride at least. 2 if I push hard. Yates's voice was steady, resolved. Mrs. Owen, let me take you both back to your cabin. You'll need to pack whatever you can manage for a journey. No, Penny said firmly. Jacob's too sick to travel that far. He needs help now. Yates considered this, his eyes never leaving her face. Then I'll go alone. Ride faster. Bring the doctor back or get medicine, whatever's needed. You do that. For strangers. No one should refuse a child in need, he said simply. It ain't right. They returned to Penny's cabin, where Yates helped her settle Jacob back into his small bed. The boy's breathing was shallow, his skin hot to the touch. What makes him so sick? Yates asked, watching as Penny placed a cool cloth on Jacob's forehead. It started with a cough, she explained. Then the fever came. It's in his lungs now, I think. I've seen it before when... She trailed off, the memory of her husband's decline still raw. Yates nodded. I need to know everything about his symptoms. Dr. Sullivan will ask. For the next hour, Penny described Jacob's illness in detail while Yates listened intently, committing every word to memory. He then helped her prepare a stock of firewood and checked her supplies to ensure she would have enough to last until his return. I'll leave at first light, he said, preparing to spend the night on her porch to give her and Jacob privacy. Mr. Jensen, Penny called as he reached the door. Why are you doing this? Yates paused, his hand on the latch. My sister lost a child to fever when no help came. I swore then I'd never stand by if I could help another. His voice was quiet but firm. Get some rest, Mrs. Owen. I'll be back with help as soon as I can. Dawn broke cold and clear over the Wyoming hills. Penny had barely slept, keeping vigil over Jacob through the night. When she stepped outside, Yates was already preparing his horse, tightening the cinch on his saddle and checking his provisions. I've left some jerky and hardtack by your door, he said without preamble. Keep the shotgun close. If anyone comes by, don't open the door unless you know them. Penny nodded, clutching her shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill. Mr. Jensen, I don't know how I'll ever repay you for this. No need for that, he replied, mounting his horse. Just keep that boy of yours fighting till I get back. With a tip of his hat, Yates Jensen spurred his horse and rode west toward the mountains, the rising sun at his back casting his shadow long across the plains. Penny watched until he was nothing more than a distant speck on the horizon before returning to her son's bedside. The path to Fort Bridger would take Yates through some of the roughest territory in Wyoming. The Union Pacific had made travel easier in some respects, but the railroad didn't go where he needed to be. He would follow the old emigrant trail part of the way, then cut south through the foothills of the Uinta Mountains. By midday, he had put considerable distance between himself and Evanston. His horse, A sturdy Mustang named Buck that he'd trained himself maintained a steady pace. Yates knew better than to push too hard too soon. The journey ahead would test both their endurances. As he rode, Yates found his thoughts returning to Penny Owen. There was something about the young widow's quiet strength that had struck him deeply. He had known many women in the territories hardworking, resilient women who faced the West's harshness without complaint, but something in Penny's eyes, a mixture of fierce determination and vulnerability, had stirred something forgotten within him. He made camp that night by a small creek, allowing Buck only a brief rest before they set out again under the stars. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford, not with a child's life hanging in the balance. Back in Evanston, Penny struggled to keep Jacob comfortable as his condition deteriorated. His breathing had grown more labored, and the fever refused to break despite the cool cloths she continuously applied to his forehead and chest. "Stay with me, Jacob," she whispered, cradling his small hand in hers. "Mr. Jensen is bringing help. You just need to hold on a little longer." On the morning of the second day, a knock at her door startled Penny from her exhausted vigil. Heart pounding, she reached for the shotgun before approaching the door. "Who is it?" she called. "Patricia Murray from town. I heard your boy was sick." Penny opened the door to find the blacksmith's wife standing there, a basket in her hands. Patricia was one of the few people in Evanston who had shown Penny kindness after Thomas's death. "Frank told me about Dr. Harlow turning you away," Patricia said, stepping inside and setting her basket on the table. "That man's heart is colder than a January blizzard. I've brought some of my grandmother's remedy for chest ailments and some stew for you." "Thank you," Penny said, fighting back tears of gratitude. "Jacob's getting worse, and I'm afraid now—" "None of that," Patricia interrupted firmly. "I heard that Jensen boy rode out to fetch help from Fort Bridger. He's a good man, that one. Quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but decent through and through. You know him." Patricia nodded, already busy preparing the herbal remedy at Penny's stove. "He's worked for the double cross going on 3 years now. Came from somewhere back east, I think. Missouri, maybe. Nobody knows much about his past, but McAllister says he's the best hand he's ever had. Good with horses especially." "He didn't hesitate," Penny said softly, watching as Patricia stirred the pungent mixture. "Just offered to ride for help like it was nothing." "Some men are built that way," Patricia replied with a knowing smile. "Now let's get this into your boy." Together, they managed to get Jacob to swallow some of the remedy, though he remained locked in the grip of fever. Patricia stayed through the afternoon, helping Penny change the bedding and prepare more cool compresses. As Patricia prepared to leave, she squeezed Penny's hand. "I'll come back tomorrow, and Penny, have faith. Yates Jensen is a man who keeps his word." Alone again with Jacob, Penny found herself dwelling on what Patricia had told her about Yates, a man from back east, good with horses, who kept to himself. What had brought him to Wyoming? What made him the kind of man who would ride 3 days to help a woman and child he'd never met before? Meanwhile, Yates pushed on through increasingly difficult terrain. A sudden summer storm had swollen the streams, forcing him to seek alternate crossings and losing precious hours in the process. By nightfall of the second day, he was still several hours from Fort Bridger. Exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him as he made a cold camp in a sheltered hollow. Buck needed rest, and Yates knew pushing the horse any further without a break would leave them both stranded. As he huddled under his slicker against the light rain that had begun to fall, his mind wandered to his own past, to the sister he'd mentioned to Penny. Sarah had been just 16 when she'd married and moved west with her husband. Yates, barely 20 himself, had promised their parents he'd follow and look after her. But he'd arrived too late. The frontier's harsh realities had already claimed her child and broken her spirit. Her husband had abandoned her soon after, leaving her alone and destitute. By the time Yates found her, Sarah was wasting away from grief and illness. She died in his arms, extracting a promise that he would help others where he had failed her. That promise had guided his actions for the past 8 years, leading him from place to place across the West, working where he could and moving on when memories grew too painful or attachments too deep. The Double Cross Ranch had been the longest he'd stayed anywhere, partly because owner Caleb McAllister respected his privacy, and partly because the solitude of working with horses suited him. But now, as he prepared to continue his journey at the first hint of dawn, Yates realized that Penny Owen and her son had awakened something in him he'd thought long buried: a desire for connection, for roots, for more than the solitary existence he'd carved out for himself. The third day of his journey dawned clear but cold. Yates pushed Buck hard, knowing they were close. By mid-morning, the outbuildings of Fort Bridger came into view. The old trading post had evolved into a military installation after the Army purchased it in 1858, and now served as both a military base and a community center for the surrounding area. Yates rode directly to the infirmary, where he found Dr. Sullivan examining a soldier's broken arm. "Jensen," the doctor greeted him with surprise. "What brings you here? Not injured again, I hope?" "Not me, Doc," Yates replied, his voice rough from the journey. "A boy in Evanston, 5 years old, burning with fever, struggling to breathe." His mother tried to get help from Harlow, but he turned them away. Dr. Sullivan's face darkened. "Franklin Harlow and I attended medical college together. Even then, he was more concerned with profit than patients." He turned to finish bandaging the soldier's arm. "When did the boy fall ill?" 4 days ago now. Started with a cough, then fever. His breathing's labored and his mother says it's in his lungs." "Sounds like pneumonia," Dr. Sullivan said grimly. "Common enough but dangerous in children. I'll need to prepare some medications." He turned to the orderly assisting him. "Wilson, pack my traveling case and prepare 2 horses. We leave as soon as possible." Yates swayed slightly on his feet, the exhaustion of his journey catching up with him. Dr. Sullivan noticed immediately. "When did you last sleep, Jensen?" "Caught an hour or so last night," Yates admitted. "And how long did it take you to get here?" "Left Evanston at dawn 2 days back." The doctor whistled low. "That's a 4-day journey at normal pace. You made good time." He clapped Yates on the shoulder. "Get some food and rest. We'll leave in an hour." "No," Yates said firmly. "Every minute counts for that boy. I'll rest when we're on the way." Dr. Sullivan studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You're a stubborn man, Jensen, but I admire your determination. Help Wilson with the preparations, then." In less than an hour they were on their way, Yates on a fresh horse provided by the fort while Buck recovered in the stables. Dr. Sullivan had packed medicines, instruments, and supplies for treating pneumonia, all secured in leather saddlebags. "Tell me about the mother, Doctor," Sullivan said as they rode. "She must be something special for you to make this ride." Yates kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Widow. Husband died last winter. She's been running their homestead alone, taking care of the boy. Strong woman, Doctor." Sullivan smiled slightly at Yates's terse description. "And pretty, I'd wager, from the way you're avoiding my question." Yates didn't respond, but the slight color that rose to his weathered cheeks told the doctor all he needed to know. Back in Evanston, Penny had reached the limits of her endurance. For 4 days, she had barely slept, tending to Jacob around the clock. Patricia Murray visited daily, bringing food and helping where she could, but even she was beginning to show signs of worry as Jacob's condition showed no improvement. He promised he'd be back, Penny whispered, more to herself than to Patricia as they sat by Jacob's bedside. He promised. And he will be, Patricia assured her. But Penny, you need to rest. You'll make yourself ill at this rate. I can't leave him, Penny insisted. What if he wakes and I'm not here? What if he… She couldn't bring herself to finish the thought. Patricia placed a firm hand on Penny's shoulder. I'll watch him. Just lie down for an hour at least, right here on your bed. I promise I'll wake you if there's any change. Too exhausted to argue further, Penny finally relented. She lay down on her bed, intending only to close her eyes for a moment, but her body betrayed her, and she fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. She awoke to the sound of hoofbeats and men's voices. For a moment, disoriented by exhaustion, she thought she was dreaming. Then Patricia was shaking her gently. Penny, wake up. They're here. Penny stumbled to her feet and rushed to the door just as Yates Jensen and another man were dismounting. Yates looked haggard, his face gray with exhaustion and several days' growth of beard shadowing his jaw. But his eyes met hers steadily. Mrs. Owen, he said with a slight nod. This is Dr. Sullivan from Fort Bridger. The doctor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and graying temples, stepped forward. Mrs. Owen, I understand your son is very ill. May I see him? Penny led them inside, where Jacob lay still and pale on his small bed. Dr. Sullivan moved immediately to the child's side, his experienced hands gentle as he examined the boy. You were right, Jensen, he said after a few minutes. Pneumonia and quite severe. We need to act quickly. For the next hour, Penny assisted as Dr. Sullivan treated Jacob, administering medicines and showing her how to prepare steam treatments to ease his breathing. Throughout it all, Yates remained by the door, his tall frame seeming to fill the small cabin even as he tried to stay out of the way. Finally, Dr. Sullivan straightened, packing his instruments back into his bag. I've done what I can for now. The medicine should help reduce the fever and the steam treatments will loosen the congestion in his lungs. The next 24 hours will be critical. Will he? Penny couldn't finish the question. Dr. Sullivan's expression softened. He's young and was healthy before this illness. That gives him an advantage, and you've done well keeping him hydrated and cool. There's every reason to hope, Mrs. Owen. Penny nodded, tears of relief and exhaustion streaming down her face. Thank you, Doctor. And you, Mr. Jensen. I don't know how I can ever none of that now, Dr. Sullivan interrupted kindly. You need rest as much as your son does. I'll stay tonight to monitor his condition. And I'll tend to the animals, Yates added, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the cabin. Your cow needs milking, and I saw your chickens haven't been fed today. Before Penny could protest, both men had moved to their self-assigned tasks, leaving her alone with Jacob and Patricia. You see, Patricia said softly, I told you Yates Jensen was a man of his word. The night passed in a blur for Penny. She drifted between sleep and wakefulness, always returning to Jacob's side to check on him. Doctor. Sullivan maintained a quiet vigil, periodically checking the boy's pulse and breathing, administering more medicine when needed. Sometime in the early morning hours, Penny stepped outside for a moment of fresh air. She found Yates sitting on her porch steps, his back against the railing, hat pulled low over his eyes. He straightened as she appeared. You should be resting, he said. I could say the same to you, she replied, settling beside him on the step. Have you slept at all since you left? Caught a few hours here and there, he shrugged as if it were nothing. How's the boy? Dr. Sullivan says his fever's starting to come down. Penny's voice caught. He thinks Jacob will make it. Yates nodded, his eyes on the horizon where the first hint of dawn was lightening the sky. Good. That's good. They sat in silence for a few moments, the cool pre-dawn air washing over them. Penny studied his profile in the dim light, the strong jaw now covered in stubble, the straight nose, the lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting against sun and wind. "Mr. Jensen," she began hesitantly, "I don't know how to thank you for what you've done. Most men wouldn't have. Most men haven't seen what happens when help doesn't come," he interrupted quietly. "And it's Yates. Mr. Jensen was my father." "Yates," she repeated, the name feeling right on her lips. "I'm Penny." He turned to look at her then, his gaze direct and unguarded. In that moment, something passed between them, an understanding deeper than words could express. The moment was broken by the sound of the door opening. "Doctor." Sullivan stepped out, his expression weary but satisfied. "The fever's broken," he announced. "He's sleeping naturally now. I believe the worst is past." Penny's knees went weak with relief, and she might have fallen if Yates hadn't steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Thank God," she whispered. "Can I see him?" "Of course. He'll likely sleep for several hours yet, but it's a healing sleep now." As Penny hurried inside, Dr. Sullivan turned to Yates. "You should get some proper rest, Jensen. You've done your part and then some." Yates nodded but made no move to leave. "I'll stay a bit longer, make sure everything's settled." Dr. Sullivan's eyes twinkled knowingly. "I'm sure Mrs. Owen would appreciate that. She seems like a remarkable woman." "She is," Yates agreed simply. Inside the cabin, Penny sat beside Jacob's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. For the first time in days, his breathing came easily, and his skin was cool to the touch. She brushed a lock of hair from his forehead, her heart overflowing with gratitude. Jacob stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Mama," he murmured sleepily. "I'm here, my love," Penny said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "How do you feel?" "Thirsty," he replied, his voice weak but clear. Penny helped him sip some water, her hands trembling with relief. "You've been very sick, but you're going to be all right now." "Did the doctor come?" Jacob asked, his eyes already drooping with exhaustion. "Yes, sweetheart. A very good doctor. And a very brave man went to fetch him for you." "Can I thank him?" Jacob mumbled, fighting to keep his eyes open. "When you're stronger," Penny promised. "Now sleep, my brave boy." As Jacob drifted back to sleep, Penny felt a presence behind her. She turned to find Yates standing in the doorway, his expression softening as he looked at the sleeping child. "He woke up," Penny whispered. "He asked for water." Dr. Sullivan was right, he's going to be all right. Yates nodded, a rare smile transforming his tired face. "He's got a strong spirit, like his mother." Over the next few days, Jacob continued to improve steadily under Dr. Sullivan's care. The doctor remained at the Owen homestead, sleeping on a pallet in the main room and monitoring Jacob's recovery closely. Yates, despite Penny's insistence that he had done more than enough, stayed as well, taking over the daily chores of the homestead, repairing fences, tending to the animals, and even beginning work on a broken wagon wheel that had been sitting neglected since Thomas's death. Patricia Murray visited daily, bringing news from town and fresh baked goods. On her third visit, she pulled Penny aside while Yates was out checking the livestock. "People are talking," she said without preamble. "About what?" Penny asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "About you having two men staying at your place," Patricia replied bluntly. "Dr. Sullivan's presence is understood, but Jensen's continued stay is raising eyebrows. You know how tongues wag in a small town." Penny felt her cheeks flush with indignation. "He saved my son's life. He's been nothing but respectful, and he's been working from dawn to dusk helping around the place." Patricia held up a placating hand. "I know that, and anyone with sense knows it too, but you should be aware of the talk. Dr. Harlow's been particularly vocal, suggesting it's improper." "Dr. Harlow," Penny repeated, her voice hardening. The man who refused to treat my dying child now presumes to judge who may help me. I'm just warning you as a friend, Patricia said gently. Reputation matters for a widow, especially one with a child. After Patricia left, Penny found herself dwelling on the conversation. She had been so focused on Jacob's recovery that she hadn't considered how Yates's presence might be perceived. Yet the thought of asking him to leave filled her with an unexpected sadness. That evening, as they sat on the porch after supper, Jacob finally asleep inside under Dr. Sullivan's watchful eye, Penny broached the subject. "Patricia says people in town are talking about you staying here," she said, watching his profile in the fading light. Yates was silent for a long moment. "Does that trouble you?" "No," she admitted, "but perhaps it should. I haven't given much thought to appearances." He turned to look at her then, his gaze steady. "I can leave tomorrow if that's what you want." "It's not what I want," Penny replied honestly, "but I have Jacob to think of. This is a small town with a long memory. What if I stayed at the Double Cross and rode over during the days?" Yates suggested. "I could still help with the heavier work, but it would quiet the gossip." Penny considered this compromise. "You've already done so much. You don't need to keep helping us." "Maybe I want to," he said quietly. Something in his tone made Penny's heart skip. She looked down at her hands, suddenly unsure of what to say. "I should be getting back to the ranch soon anyway," Yates continued, filling the silence. "McAllister's been patient, but I've been gone nearly a week now." "Of course," Penny said quickly. "You have your own responsibilities. I didn't mean to keep you from them." "You haven't," Yates assured her. "McAllister's a good boss. He knows where I went and why." They fell silent again. The night sounds of the Wyoming territory surrounding them, distant coyotes, the rustle of wind through the grass, the occasional stamp of a horse in the small corral. "Jacob asked about you today," Penny said finally. "He wants to thank you properly when he's stronger." Yates smiled slightly. "He's a good boy. You've done well with him on your own and all." "It hasn't been easy," Penny admitted. "After Thomas died, there were days I didn't know how we'd manage, but we've survived." "More than survived," Yates corrected. "That boy's got spirit and kindness in him. That comes from his raising." Penny felt warmth spread through her at the simple compliment. "Thank you for saying that and for everything else." 2 days later, Dr. Sullivan declared Jacob well enough to travel back to Fort Bridger with him. "I've left detailed instructions for his continued care," he told Penny as he packed his medical bag. "The danger has passed, but he'll need plenty of rest and good food to regain his strength." "How can I ever repay you?" Penny asked, pressing payment into his hand despite his protests. "By keeping that boy healthy," Dr. Sullivan replied with a smile. "And perhaps by considering a certain cowboy's interest in your welfare." Before Penny could respond to this surprising statement, Yates appeared in the doorway. "Your horse is saddled and ready, Doctor." Sullivan thanked him, then bent down to say goodbye to Jacob, who was sitting up in bed for the first time, propped against pillows and looking pale but alert. "Remember what I told you," the doctor said, ruffling the boy's hair. "No getting out of bed without your mother's permission for at least another week." "Yes, sir," Jacob replied solemnly. "Thank you for making me better." "You're very welcome, young man." Dr. Sullivan straightened and turned to Penny. "I'll check in when I'm next in Evanston. Should be within a month or so." After the doctor had ridden away, Yates lingered, an uncharacteristic uncertainty in his manner. "I should be heading back to the Double Cross," he said finally. "McAllister sent word he needs help with the new horses." Penny nodded, fighting the disappointment that rose within her. "Of course. You've done far more than anyone could have expected already. Could I? That is, would it be all right if I stopped by now and then, to check on Jacob's progress and help with any work that needs doing?" "We'd like that," Penny said softly. a smile warming her face. "Very much." Over the following weeks, true to his word, Yates rode out to the Owen homestead regularly. Sometimes he came with practical supplies from town: sugar, coffee, or tools that needed replacing. Other times, he arrived with small treasures for Jacob: a carved wooden horse, a book of adventure stories, or once, memorably, a small harmonica that delighted the boy. Each visit seemed to strengthen the tentative connection forming between them. Penny found herself looking forward to the sound of hoofbeats with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. After Thomas's death, she had resigned herself to a life of practicality and duty, with little room for personal happiness. But Yates Jensen was slowly awakening possibilities she had thought forever closed to her. Jacob, now fully recovered, took to following Yates around the homestead whenever he visited, peppering him with questions about horses, cattle, and life on the ranch. Yates answered with a patience that endeared him further to Penny, never dismissing the boy's curiosity or treating his questions as bothersome. One crisp October afternoon, nearly 2 months after Jacob's illness, Yates arrived with his saddlebags fuller than usual. "McAllister's wife sent some preserves," he explained as he handed the jars to Penny, "and I brought something else." He reached back into the saddlebag and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What is it?" Penny asked, touched by the thoughtfulness. "Something for you," Yates replied, a hint of nervousness in his usually confident manner. "Open it." Inside the paper was a beautiful blue wool shawl, soft to the touch and finely made. Penny ran her fingers over it, speechless for a moment. "I noticed your old one was wearing thin," Yates explained. "Winter's coming on. Thought you might need something warmer." "It's beautiful," Penny said, wrapping it around her shoulders. "But you shouldn't spend your wages on us, Yates." "Who else would I spend them on?" he asked simply. That evening, after Jacob had been put to bed with promises that Yates would teach him to lasso the next time he visited, Penny and Yates sat by the fire. Outside, the first snow of the season had begun to fall, dusting the Wyoming landscape with white. "I spoke with McAllister yesterday," Yates said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "About the future." Penny looked up from her mending, her heart suddenly beating faster. "Oh, he offered me a permanent position as foreman. His current man's moving back east come spring." "That's wonderful," Penny said warmly. "You deserve it. McAllister's lucky to have you." "I turned it down," Yates said quietly, Penny's hands stilled. "Why would you do that? It's a good position with better pay and a cabin of your own, I'd imagine. I've been thinking about something else." Yates set down his coffee cup and moved to sit beside her on the small sofa. "Penny, these past months coming here, being with you and Jacob, it's meant more to me than I can say." Penny's throat tightened with emotion. "It's meant a great deal to us as well." "I've been alone a long time," Yates continued, his voice low and earnest. "Moving from place to place, never putting down roots. After Sarah died, I didn't see the point. But meeting you, seeing how you fought to make a life for Jacob on your own, it's made me want something I haven't wanted in years." "What's that?" Penny asked, hardly daring to hope she understood his meaning. "A home. A family." He reached out hesitantly and took her hand in his. "I know it hasn't been that long, and I know Thomas's memory is still important to you and Jacob. I'm not asking to replace that, but I care for you both more than I thought possible." Tears filled Penny's eyes as she listened. "Yates, let me finish," he said gently. "I've saved enough over the years. There's a parcel of land for sale adjacent to yours. Good grazing land with access to water. I'm thinking of buying it, building a place there. I could help you with this homestead, be close by for whatever you need, but still give you and Jacob your independence. You'd settle here, because of us." Penny was overwhelmed by the gesture. Because of you, he confirmed. But only if it's what you want to. If not, I understand. I can stay on at the Double Cross, still visit when I can. Penny looked into his face. This man who had ridden 3 days through wilderness to save her son, who had worked tirelessly to help her maintain the homestead, who had shown Jacob kindness and patience when the boy needed a man's guidance. In his eyes she saw not just passion but respect, not just desire but genuine care. "Yates," she said softly, "what I want, what Jacob and I both want, is you, not nearby on another homestead but here with us, as a family." For a moment Yates seemed stunned by her words. Then a slow, radiant smile spread across his face, transforming his usually reserved expression into one of pure joy. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "It's a big step for all of us." "I've never been more certain of anything," Penny replied. "These past months have shown me that life can offer second chances at happiness. Jacob adores you and I." She paused, gathering her courage. "I've fallen in love with you, Yates Jensen, not just for what you did for us, but for who you are." Yates reached out, gently cupping her face in his weathered hands. "I love you too, Penny Owen. Have since the moment you opened your door that night, looking so fierce and determined despite your fear." Their first kiss was tender, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally drew apart, Penny rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "What will people say?" she murmured, remembering Patricia's warnings. Yates chuckled, the sound rumbling beneath her ear. "They'll say I'm the luckiest man in Wyoming territory." And they'd be right. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Evanston. Most reactions were positive. The community had watched Yates's devotion to Penny and Jacob over the months and approved of the match. Patricia Murray was among the first to congratulate them, bringing a quilt she had been working on as an engagement gift. "I knew from the moment he rode out to fetch that doctor that you two were destined for each other," she declared, embracing Penny warmly. "Doctor." Harlow, however, made his disapproval known, suggesting to anyone who would listen that Penny had set her cap for Yates from the beginning, using her son's illness to trap an eligible man. These rumors reached their ears through Patricia, who reported them with indignation. "That man," she fumed. "As if anyone who knows either of you would believe such nonsense." Yates's response was characteristically straightforward. The next time he was in town for supplies, he confronted Harlow outside the general store, where several townspeople could overhear. "Doctor." "Harlow," he said, his voice carrying in the cold December air. "I understand you've been questioning the circumstances of my engagement to Mrs. Owen." Harlow drew himself up defensively. "I merely expressed concern about the hasty nature of the arrangement." "There's nothing hasty about it," Yates replied evenly. "But I want to be clear about one thing. If I ever hear that you've spoken ill of Penny again, or if you ever again refuse treatment to someone in need because they can't pay up front, you'll answer to me. This town deserves better from its doctor." The confrontation, reported in detail by witnesses, effectively silenced Harlow's gossip and elevated Yates's standing in the community even further. By the time their wedding day arrived in early January 1877, even the most skeptical townspeople had come around to wishing the couple well. They were married in the small church in Evanston, with Jacob standing proudly beside them. Patricia Murray had helped Penny make a new dress for the occasion, a deep blue that matched the shawl Yates had given her. Caleb McAllister served as Yates's best man, having become a friend as well as employer over the years. "Never thought I'd see this day," McAllister commented during the small reception held at the Murray home afterward. "Jensen, settling down. You've worked a miracle, Mrs. Jensen." Penny smiled, still adjusting to her new name. The miracle is what he did for us. I don't know where Jacob and I would be without him. Mama, can I show Mr. McAllister the lassoing Yates taught me? Jacob interrupted, tugging at Penny's skirt. Outside only, Penny laughed, watching as her son dashed away, McAllister following with amused indulgence. Yates appeared at her side, sliding an arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I've been thinking about the spring planting. If we expand the vegetable garden and maybe add some fruit trees along the south side," Penny laughed, placing a finger over his lips. "Always planning, aren't you? Got a future to think about now," he said with a smile. "Speaking of which, I have a wedding gift for you." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document. "I wasn't sure when to give you this, but now seems right." Penny unfolded the paper, reading it slowly. "This is the deed to the adjacent land you mentioned. You bought it." "I did," Yates confirmed. "But not to build a separate place. I thought we could expand our homestead. Jacob will need room to grow and maybe someday." He trailed off, a question in his eyes. "Someday there might be more children who need room to run," Penny finished for him, her heart swelling with love. "I'd like that very much." As winter gave way to spring, the Jensen family settled into their new life together. Yates proved to be as dedicated a husband and father as he had been a friend and helper. With his knowledge of ranching and Penny's skill at homesteading, their small property began to flourish. Jacob thrived under Yates's guidance, blossoming from a quiet, somewhat timid boy into a confident child eager to learn and explore. Though he never forgot Thomas, his birth father, he came to love Yates with the simple, complete devotion of a child who feels secure and cherished. By summer, Penny had news that completed their happiness. She told Yates one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jacob already asleep inside. "I'm going to have a baby," she said, taking his hand and placing it over her still flat stomach. "In the winter." Yates's face transformed with wonder and joy. "A baby," he repeated as if testing the word. "Our baby." "Are you pleased?" Penny asked, though his expression had already answered her question. "Please doesn't begin to cover it," he replied, gathering her into his arms. "I never thought I'd have this, Penny. A wife, a son, a child on the way. After Sarah died, I thought my chance at family was gone forever. Sometimes life gives us second chances when we least expect them," Penny said softly. "If Jacob hadn't fallen ill, if Dr. Harlow hadn't been such a heartless fool," Yates added with a wry smile, "if you hadn't happened to be passing by that night." "I've thought about that often," Yates admitted. "What are the odds that I'd be riding past your homestead at just that moment? One day earlier or later, and our paths might never have crossed." "I like to think we would have found each other somehow," Penny said. "That some things are meant to be." Their daughter, Sarah Patricia Jensen, was born on a snowy January night in 1878, exactly 1 year after their wedding. Dr. Sullivan, true to his word, had continued to visit Evanston regularly and arrived just in time to assist with the birth. "A perfect little girl," he pronounced, placing the swaddled infant in Yates's arms while he attended to Penny. "And a strong mother. You're both blessed, Jensen." Yates looked down at his daughter's tiny face, then at his exhausted but radiant wife. "I know it," he said simply. Jacob, who had waited anxiously in the kitchen with Patricia Murray, was brought in to meet his sister. His face lit up with wonder as Yates carefully transferred the baby to his arms, showing him how to support her head. "She's so small," he whispered, awestruck. "She'll grow," Penny assured him from the bed. "And she'll need her big brother to look after her and teach her things." "I will," Jacob promised solemnly. "Just like Yates teaches me." The years that followed brought more joy than either Penny or Yates could have imagined that desperate night when fate first brought them together. Their homestead prospered, expanding to include a small herd of cattle and enough cropland to sustain them comfortably. Two more children joined their family, Thomas Caleb in 1880 and Elizabeth Grace in 1883. Dr. Harlow eventually left Evanston, unable to compete with the younger, more compassionate doctor who established a practice there in 1879. Before he left, however, he made an unexpected visit to the Jensen homestead. "Mrs. Jensen," he said stiffly when Penny answered the door, clearly surprised to find him standing there. "I've come to say goodbye. I'm relocating to Denver." "I see," Penny replied neutrally. "I wish you well, Doctor." Harlow hesitated, then continued with visible effort. "I also came to apologize for refusing to treat your son that night and for the things I said afterward. It was unprofessional and unkind." Penny was silent for a moment, taken aback by the unexpected apology. "What changed your mind?" she finally asked. "Seeing how things turned out," he admitted. "You have a good family here. Jensen is a better man than I gave him credit for, and perhaps I've been a poorer doctor than I should have been." "Thank you for saying that," Penny said, finding forgiveness easier than she would have expected. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong." As Evanston grew with the continued expansion of the railroad, the Jensen family became respected fixtures in the community. Yates served on the town council for several terms, advocating particularly for improved medical care for all residents regardless of their ability to pay. Penny established a small school in their home before the town built a proper schoolhouse, teaching not only her own children but several from neighboring homesteads. Jacob grew into a thoughtful young man with his mother's compassion and his stepfather's quiet strength. He showed a particular aptitude for medicine, inspired perhaps by his own brush with death as a child. When he turned 18, Dr. Sullivan, by then semi-retired, offered to sponsor his medical education back east. "Your son has a calling," he told Penny and Yates. "And a good doctor is born from more than just book learning. He understands suffering and the difference that care can make. He'll be an excellent physician." On the night before Jacob left for medical school, the family gathered on the porch of the home that had grown along with them over the years. The younger children had already been sent to bed, leaving Penny, Yates, and Jacob to share a final quiet evening together. "I've been thinking about something," Jacob said, breaking the contemplative silence. "About how everything in our lives changed because of one night. If you hadn't gotten sick, if Dr. Harlow hadn't turned us away, if Yates hadn't ridden for help. If even one of those things had been different, we might not be sitting here now," Penny agreed, her hand finding Yates's in the gathering darkness. "I've had cause to be grateful for all of it," Yates said. "Even Harlow's refusal, though it didn't seem like anything to be thankful for at the time." Jacob smiled, looking out at the land that had been his home, the place where he had nearly died and where he had grown to manhood under the guidance of the courageous mother, who had never given up, and the devoted stepfather, who had ridden 3 days to save a child he didn't know. "I want to be the kind of doctor who never turns away someone in need," he said with quiet determination, "no matter who they are or whether they can pay." "You will be," Penny assured him, pride filling her heart. "You've learned from both the good and the bad examples you've seen." Later that night, after Jacob had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Penny and Yates stood together on the porch, looking up at the vast Wyoming sky filled with stars. "Did you ever imagine, that night you rode away from here, what would come of it all?" Penny asked, nestled against his chest. Yates's arms tightened around her. "Not in my wildest dreams. I was just trying to save a child. I never thought I'd find my home, my heart." Our lives have been blessed, Penny murmured. 4 healthy children this land each other. And it all started because a stubborn woman refused to give up on her son, and a town doctor refused to do his duty, Yates said with a soft laugh. Life takes strange turns, doesn't it? The best kind, Penny agreed, turning in his arms to look up at the man who had transformed her life through a single act of courage and kindness. I love you, Yates Jensen, more with each passing year. And I love you, Penny Jensen, he replied, bending to kiss her beneath the endless Wyoming stars. From that first night, through all the days since, and for all the days to come. As they stood together in the quiet of the night, the homestead sleeping around them, both knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together just as they had that desperate night long ago, when a cowboy had ridden out of darkness and into their lives, changing everything forever.